Mark Wahlberg gets mocked by a rude gym trainer. His response leaves everyone speechless. The California sun hadn't even reached its full blaze when Mark Wahlberg's blacked-out Escalade pulled quietly into the back parking lot of Iron Pit Gym, a no-frills, hard-as-nails training facility tucked between a chain-link fence and a taco truck in East Los Angeles. He stepped out wearing a gray hoodie pulled low, sunglasses, and a baseball cap, looking more like a hungover dad than a multi-millionaire actor with a global fitness brand. Mark didn't come here to be seen. In fact, he came here hoping not to be. It was a far cry from his usual high-end setups, but that was the point. He was scouting locations for an upcoming indie project, a gritty redemption story, and wanted to absorb the rawness of places like this. What he didn't expect was to be part of one himself. Inside, the gym was already alive. Rusted chains clanked, plates slammed onto concrete, and the air was thick with sweat, protein powder, and male ego. No music, no mirrors, just men and a few women grinding through reps like they had something to prove. Nobody noticed Mark at first. He liked it that way. There was a rhythm in this kind of place, a brutal authenticity that corporate gyms sterilized. You could smell the ambition, the pain, the release. It reminded him of his early days in Boston, sneaking into boxing gyms and getting thrown out 5 minutes later. He felt something stir in him, the fire that started it all. He checked in at the front desk under a fake name and signed a waiver. The kid behind the counter barely looked up. "Locker rooms down the hall," he mumbled, tapping away at his phone. Mark smirked. No recognition. No one asking for a selfie. He was just another guy in a hoodie looking to lift. He stashed his bag in a beat-up locker, laced his sneakers, and stepped into the belly of the gym like a soldier returning to the battlefield. A group of guys were deadlifting in the corner, grunting like bulls in heat. Another guy was doing dips with chains around his neck. Mark nodded to a few of them. Nothing back. They weren't rude, just focused. This wasn't a social scene. It was war. He warmed up quietly with some dynamic stretches and light resistance band work. A few lifters glanced over at him, maybe curious about the stranger's fluid movement or tight routine, but nobody said a word. Then he moved to the free weights, dialing into a familiar rhythm. Controlled breathing, perfect form, no wasted motion. Every rep was clean, purposeful. He wasn't showing off, but to anyone who knew the language of the body, it was clear. This guy knew what he was doing. Still, his anonymity held. The hoodie helped. So did the fact that most people in the Iron Pit didn't watch daytime talk shows or follow celebrity fitness routines. They followed pain, weight, and results. Mark was halfway through his second set of incline dumbbell presses when it hit him. This might be the best gym he'd been in all year. There were no influencers, no ring lights, just raw hunger, and he loved it. He glanced around, taking mental notes of the layout for the film. Brick walls with faded graffiti, ceiling fans spinning on their last legs, and the battered "no phones, no excuses" sign hanging crooked above the squat racks. The energy was honest, and that's what his film needed. It was supposed to be about a guy who lost everything and clawed his way back from rock bottom. This gym was rock bottom with a barbell. And yet, for all the heavy lifting and bravado in the air, something felt light, liberating even. Mark wasn't being watched or judged. He was just another set of muscles trying to earn his endorphins. It was rare for him. Fame had long since robbed him of invisibility, especially in public gyms. But here he was invisible, and strangely that felt like home. Still, it wouldn't last long. Fame had a funny way of creeping back into a room, even through the tiniest cracks. And this gym, with all its grit and testosterone, was about to get a wake-up call. That call came in the form of a voice, a loud one. "Hey, boss man." It boomed across the floor, deep and slightly nasal, dripping with sarcasm. Mark turned. A man was approaching, tall, built like a linebacker, clipboard under one arm, whistle around his neck, and an attitude that arrived 5 seconds before he did. "You lookin' for the Zumba class? Or just taking selfies for the gram?" The trainer, Mark would later learn his name was Chad, had mistaken him for someone playing fitness tourist. It was an easy mistake to make if you didn't recognize one of the most famous fitness-driven actors on the planet. Mark laughed softly, Not because the comment was funny, but because this whole situation felt so surreal. He had come to disappear, and now he was being targeted like fresh meat in a prison yard. Still, he said nothing, just a small nod. But Chad wasn't done. Trainers like him rarely were. The gym quieted slightly, sensing a confrontation brewing. Like sharks drawn to the scent of drama, a few lifters subtly adjusted their angles to get a better view. Mark felt their eyes but didn't flinch. He wasn't there to prove anything. Or so he thought. The irony wasn't lost on him. He trained with Navy SEALs, endured 4 a.m. call times for action roles, completed insane daily regimens, and here he was, being treated like a rookie who just bought his first shaker bottle. But he didn't stop. He moved on to dips, then sled pushes, focused and steady. He figured if he ignored it, the noise would die down. Didn't. Chad moved closer, arms crossed, smirking like he'd just spotted weakness. Mark stayed calm. He wasn't here to win an argument, he was here to work. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a familiar fire sparked. The one from his days on the street, hustling to stay ahead. The one that made him wake up before the sun and outwork guys half his age. That fire didn't like being underestimated. And as Chad loomed nearby, throwing out barbs and critiques, that fire quietly flared. Not into anger, into resolve. Mark didn't need to talk. His reps would. His discipline would. His story would. He didn't know it yet, but by the time this workout ended, everyone in that gym, including the loudmouth trainer, would remember exactly who he was. Not because of his name, because of what he did. The moment Chad spotted Mark lining up for a set of barbell rows, the air in the gym shifted. Just a degree, just enough. Chad, the self-anointed alpha of Iron Pit Gym, had the posture of a man who believed every square foot of rubber matting was his domain, his church, his arena. Broad-shouldered and smug, he wore his whistle like a badge of honor, despite the fact that no one had asked for his coaching in months. His clipboard didn't even have paper on it, just a permanent smudge of dried sweat and scribbled nonsense from a workout plan he abandoned in 2021. To Chad, Mark looked like another pretender. Middle-aged, hoodie-wearing, clean-cut, and annoyingly quiet. And if there was one thing Chad despised, it was silence that didn't come with submission. "You're curling those like they insulted your mom," he barked across the gym, walking over with a fake grin that didn't reach his eyes. Mark paused mid-rep, calm as ever, offering a polite nod. "You know, this ain't Planet Fitness," Chad added, voice louder now, making sure the room heard him. "We don't do glamour workouts here. We lift like men. You ever done that before?" The room went a touch quieter, just as before. But this time, the pause was heavy with anticipation. Mark met his eyes with that signature Wahlberg stillness, the kind that usually came right before a storm on camera. But here he just shrugged, calmly racking his weights and grabbing a towel. Chad followed, relentless. "You look familiar," he said, pretending to squint. "You in commercials? One of those Bowflex guys." A few guys near the squat rack laughed, unsure if it was at Mark or just the absurdity of Chad's obliviousness. "You talk like someone who skipped leg day for a decade," Chad continued, his tone turning from playful to performative. Mark's expression didn't change. Stone, still unreadable. "Nah, you're definitely an actor," Chad muttered with theatrical disdain. "I can smell it. Cologne, shaved arms, symmetrical face. No chalk, no soul." He said it like a diagnosis, like he'd just found a weed in his otherwise perfect yard. Mark continued his warm-up without reacting, moving into Bulgarian split squats with the kind of focus that makes lesser men sweat just watching. Chad, now irritated by the lack of emotional response, stepped in closer. "You filming something? Need help choreographing your pretend lifts?" The mockery was layered deep now, contempt wrapped in sarcasm, sealed with the confidence of a man who'd never been punched by humility. "Look," Chad went on, "you want to impress someone, cool. But don't come in here with soft hands and expect respect. This place is earned." Someone by the cable machine whispered, "Isn't that Mark Wahlberg?" The guy next to him laughed. "Yeah, right, like he'd be here." Chad, hearing none of this, forged ahead like a freight train fueled by protein and fragile pride. You've probably never even failed a rep, he continued, waving his arms in mock demonstration. This isn't Instagram. It's the Iron Pit. We don't do filters here. Another chuckle floated through the gym. Mark, meanwhile, tightened the weight belt around his waist and walked toward the sleds. Not a word. Just focus. Just breath. Controlled. Centered. Tell you what, Chad said, following again. Let me help you. I'll write you a real program. No fluff. Just pain. Real growth. If you're not scared of it. It was less an offer and more a challenge. Mark paused, finally speaking again, calm and clipped. I appreciate that, he said simply, voice even, posture relaxed. But I've got my own routine. Chad rolled his eyes so hard it looked like they were doing crunches. Your routine? He scoffed. What? Abs and arms on Monday? Selfies and smoothies on Tuesday? His laughter was exaggerated, theatrical. Come on, man. You're not built for this. By now, every regular in the gym had taken notice. People had paused mid-set, mid-sip, mid-scroll. The new guy wasn't cracking, wasn't getting rattled. Chad's usual MO was wearing thin, and the cracks in his confidence showed in the way he started flexing between sentences. You're like one of those guys who reads Men's Health and thinks it makes him a warrior, Chad added, arms spread wide. You look the part. But let's be honest. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in my morning boot camp. Mark nodded slowly, letting the insult pass over him like a light breeze. Maybe, he said, setting up for another lift. But I've got some gas left in the tank. You're not even sweating, Chad shot back. Real training hurts. Real training makes you puke, makes you pray. He pointed to his own chest. You see this? This is earned. I live here. This is my house. The irony of the statement hung heavy in the air, especially since the man standing in front of him literally owned multiple gyms, had trained with Delta Force, and had produced entire films about men forged through fire. But Mark didn't flex credentials. He never had. Instead, he picked up a 150-pound sandbag and began bear hug carries across the floor. Lungs steady, movements sharp. Chad took a step back, the fire in his voice dimming just slightly. You trying to prove something now? He muttered, trying to keep the upper hand. I don't need to prove anything to anyone, Mark said, pausing briefly between sets. But I'll never walk away from a challenge. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cocky. It just landed heavy. Final. Chad clenched his jaw. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback ready. Mark wiped sweat from his brow and grabbed a weight vest without a word. Someone near the bench press whispered, Dude, that is Mark Wahlberg. His buddy, now studying Mark's form more carefully, responded, No way, that guy's legit. Chad turned, sensing the shift, but still unwilling to give in. Fine, he said, puffing up. If you're really about that life, let's make it real. Workout challenge. My rules. You in. The words hung in the air like a hammer over a nail. Mark looked at him, tilted his head ever so slightly, and smiled. All right, Chad, he said. Let's see what real looks like. The gym felt heavier now. Not just from the weight plates or the iron sleds, but from the anticipation hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. After Chad's loud declaration of a workout challenge, there was no more background chatter, no casual sets or idle scrolling. Every lifter in the Iron Pit had subtly turned toward the unfolding showdown. Even the treadmill guy had stopped, straddling the belt like he couldn't afford to miss a second. But Mark, unbothered and uncrowded in his thoughts, simply exhaled and pulled the weight vest tighter around his torso. The click of the buckles was the only sound he made, and somehow it sounded more confident than Chad's last 10 minutes of trash talk combined. Chad had laid out the gauntlet. 5 compound exercises, no rest, brutal loads. The kind of routine meant to break down both body and ego. It was his signature challenge. He called it the pain pyramid, and he reserved it for clients he thought needed humbling. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't even ask for details. He just followed Chad to the first station like a man walking through fog. Focused, grounded, silent. We start with 225-pound deadlifts, Chad barked. 15 reps. Clean form. No bouncing. Mark nodded, cracked his knuckles, and stepped up. The bar came up smooth, 1, 2, 3, each lift crisp and deliberate. The quiet was almost eerie. No huffing, no theatrical grunts. Just breath and steel. Chad stood nearby, arms crossed, looking for flaws. But even he couldn't deny the form was textbook. "All right," he muttered. Sled push next. 40 yards down, 40 back. Waited. A couple guys in the back exchanged looks. That sled was notoriously unforgiving. Stacked with plates and dragging over uneven turf. Most guys gassed halfway. Mark gripped the handles and drove forward. No yelling, no psych-up routine, just movement. Low, powerful, relentless. He returned from the down and back without a word. Sweat forming but breath under control. Pull-ups. Waited. 20. Chad announced, trying to inject more authority. Mark adjusted the weight belt, clipped a 45-pound plate to the chain, and knocked them out with robotic tempo. The gym was silent now, the energy muted, like everyone was holding their breath. Chad glanced around, sensing the shift. This wasn't supposed to happen. The actor wasn't supposed to keep up, let alone own the routine. Barbell thrusters. 135 pounds. 20 reps. Full range. Chad's voice cracked just slightly. Mark nodded. No eye contact. No bravado. Just motion. He gripped the bar, squatted deep, pressed overhead, again and again. Every rep a metronome. Somewhere in the corner, a girl filming her own workout slowly turned her phone toward Mark. She didn't say a word. She just knew something was happening. Something that didn't happen in normal gyms with normal people. Chad called the final exercise. Burpee box jumps, 20 reps onto a 36-inch platform. That was the finisher. That was where guys collapsed, cursed, or quit. Mark dropped to the floor, bounced up, landed the first jump with precision. Then the second, the third. His rhythm never faltered. No wasted motion. Just grind. Just grit. By the 12th rep, a few lifters were clapping softly, instinctively, involuntarily. Chad noticed. His jaw tightened. By rep 20, Mark stood straight, sweat dripping from his forehead, chest rising and falling like a freight train. But his expression was unchanged. Still that calm intensity. That Wahlberg stillness. "All right," Chad muttered, trying to reclaim authority. "That's one round. We usually do 3. Mark looked at him. Finally really looked at him and smiled. "You usually do 3, he said. "But I've already done mine today. This was just extra." The room exploded. It wasn't cheers. It was laughter, respect, disbelief all tangled together. Chad looked like he'd been hit with a protein shake full of humility. Mark walked back toward the dumbbells, not in triumph, but in calm. He picked up a towel, wiped his face, and grabbed a bottle of water like it was any other Tuesday. His silence had spoken louder than any comeback. No flexing, no talking, no need to prove anything. But in the most brutal challenge Chad could throw, he hadn't just survived. He thrived. The gym, once a temple to Chad's ego, had subtly shifted its allegiance. Now all eyes were on the man who didn't say a word until the work was done. Chad followed him, slower this time, his steps heavier. "That was solid," he admitted, his tone quieter, less performative. "You've got lungs. And guts." Mark nodded, gracious but still unreadable. "Thanks," he replied. "You put together a hell of a circuit." There was no sarcasm, no smugness, just gratitude, and that disarmed Chad more than anything. "You some kind of trainer?" he asked, still fishing, still trying to reassert narrative control. Mark smiled. "Nah," he said. "I just work out sometimes." That line broke whatever was left of the tension. A few guys laughed out loud. One even clapped. Chad chuckled too, but it sounded different now, real, maybe even respectful. For the first time since the morning began, he wasn't towering over anyone. He was just a guy next to another guy who'd earned something the hard way. Not with credentials, not with trash talk, but with action. And Mark? He didn't look triumphant. He looked centered. As if this was just another morning in a lifetime of mornings where discipline did the talking. He didn't need to win. He just needed to endure. By now, the gym had transformed. What was once just another gritty training ground in East LA had become a quiet coliseum, its lifters standing like spectators between sets, hearts pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with their own reps. The quiet dominance Mark displayed during the initial circuit hadn't just silenced Chad. It had ignited a kind of reverence in the air, the kind usually reserved for watching someone do something great without saying a word. But as Mark toweled off and sipped water near the dumbbell rack, Chad couldn't let it go. The tension that had cracked in his voice was patched up now with bravado. His ego, dented but not destroyed, pushed him back into the ring. "All right," Chad said, stepping forward, his voice louder than necessary. "That was round one, but that was my gauntlet. Let's run yours now. Unless that was your best." It wasn't just a challenge. It was a last-ditch attempt to reclaim the narrative. Chad wasn't just battling Mark's strength anymore. He was battling his own pride. Mark looked at him, deadpan but curious. "You sure?" he asked. "You said that was your peak routine. You want to go again?" Chad nodded, bluffing past the fatigue already rising in his legs. "I don't back down from anyone, especially not from a guy who wears a hoodie to hide his arms." Mark smiled. Not a smirk. A smile with no edge, just calm certainty. "All right then," he said, tossing his empty water bottle into the trash without looking. "Let's level up." He walked slowly to the center of the gym, like he knew the floor would follow him. And it did. Everyone turned. Even the gym manager peeked out from the office door, headphones still around his neck. "You ever done the Navy SEAL grinder?" Mark asked, his tone still conversational. Chad blinked. "What?" Mark loosened his weight vest, rolled his neck and said, "It's a routine I picked up training with the SEALs. 5 stations, 1-minute rounds, no rest. Body weight only, full burn. No equipment to hide behind." Chad scoffed but nodded. "Sure. Why not?" He didn't know what he was agreeing to. The gauntlet began with manmakers. A devilish mix of burpees, push-ups, rows, and shoulder presses. Mark led the charge, his hoodie soaked, but his pace never faltered. Chad followed, 2 seconds behind, his breathing sharp from the start. At 30 seconds in, Mark's form was flawless, each rep clean, crisp, purposeful. Chad was already grunting, his footwork sloppy, shoulders tightening. The first minute ended, and Mark didn't stop. He dropped immediately into mountain climbers, his hands digging into the mat, knees pumping like pistons. Chad collapsed into position seconds later, already a breath behind. The third station hit like a freight train, plank to push UPS with rotation. Core, triceps, shoulders, everything. Mark's rhythm was surgical, his transitions seamless. Chad tried to keep up but paused halfway through, shaking out his arms, looking around like the air was betraying him. There were no timers, no whistles, just motion, just fire. The fourth station was lateral jump lunges, a torture device disguised as cardio. Mark flowed like water, his balance sharp, his quads screaming in silence. Chad tripped on the first switch, caught himself, but staggered 2 reps later. The gym watched in stunned quiet, like witnessing a race where the guy who's supposed to lose is suddenly lapping the field. By the time they hit the 5th round, sprawl to jump tucks, most people would have tapped. Mark didn't even blink. His breath was deep but smooth, each leap like an explosion from the floor. Chad, drenched and pale, was 10 reps behind, his legs quaking. The timer hit 5 minutes. Mark stopped, straightened, and let his arms drop naturally to his sides. He didn't flex. He didn't celebrate. He just stood there, a statue molded by effort. Chad stumbled upright, hands on knees, head down, lungs howling. That's not human," he muttered, sweat raining off his nose. "You trained for that?" Mark shrugged. "I train for life." For a full 30 seconds, nobody said anything. Just the buzzing of old fluorescent lights and the slow, collective realization that something had shifted. Chad wasn't the alpha anymore. He was a man who had just been taught by someone he assumed was beneath him. And Mark hadn't even raised his voice. The humility of it all made the moment bigger, not smaller. Chad finally stood, wobbled, and extended a shaky hand. "All right, man," he said, voice rasping. You're the real deal." Mark gripped his hand and gave it a firm, respectful shake. "Was never about proving that," he said. "Just wanted a good workout." That line hit like a sermon. One of the younger guys clapped softly. Then another. Then, unexpectedly, the room applauded. Not a wild roar, but that kind of genuine, slow-building clap reserved for performances that earn respect, not attention. Chad laughed awkwardly and looked around like someone had replaced his gym while he wasn't looking. His rule had ended, not because Mark mocked him, not because he crushed him, but because Mark showed up and let his actions speak in ways no trainer ever could. For the first time, Chad wasn't just humbled. He was learning. Mark grabbed his bag, peeled off the weight vest, and stretched out his shoulders. He was sore, but not broken. Spent, but not drained. This kind of workout didn't empty him, it refined him. He waved a quick goodbye, no mic drop, no final zinger. Just a nod to the gym, like a craftsman respecting his tools. He stepped outside into the sunlight, the cool air hitting his sweat-drenched skin, and smiled. Not because he won, but because he didn't need to win to make an impact. Inside, Chad sat down on a bench, staring at the floor like it had just taught him something he wasn't ready for. The gauntlet had been run, and Mark hadn't just survived it, he'd redefined it. The gym's energy had changed so completely that it barely resembled the space it was an hour ago. What was once Chad's personal echo chamber had been humbled into reverent stillness, filled with nods of approval, lingering awe, and a strange, reluctant admiration. Mark had finished his last set and was seated on a wooden plyo box near the dumbbell rack, lacing his shoes, the steady rhythm of his breath finally slowing. Around him, lifters were whispering now. Not mocking, but questioning, confirming, processing. "That has to be him," someone muttered by the lat pull-down machine. "No regular dude trains like that." But even now, even with half the gym halfway convinced they'd just watched a Hollywood legend outwork them all, no one had the nerve to ask directly. It was as if doing so would shatter the magic of what had just happened, like naming a miracle too early. Chad stood a few feet away, arms crossed, no longer trying to appear dominant, just trying to stay upright. The sweat on his brow had dried into salt lines, and his biceps, once flexed with intention, now hung slack, like deflated tires. He'd sat with what happened, swallowed the sting of it, and in a rare moment of self-awareness, realized that he'd just been outclassed not by strength, but by grace. But still, something gnawed at him. The voice inside, the one that needed an answer, needed an identity, needed to put a label on what he couldn't explain. "All right, man," he said finally, walking toward Mark with a slower, less performative stride. "I gotta ask." The gym quieted again, instinctively tuning in. "Who are you, really?" Mark paused, fingers still adjusting his laces. He looked up, not smug, not theatrical, just present. "Name's Mark," he said evenly. Chad nodded slowly, eyebrows raised. "Yeah. But Mark what?" There it was, the moment everyone had been waiting for. The confirmation, the reveal, the pin-drop silence before the curtain lifts. Mark looked around, his eyes scanning the room like he was about to break a secret he'd been holding for fun. "Mark Wahlberg," he said finally, standing up and slipping the hoodie over his head. A ripple moved through the gym. Not the kind that explodes like fireworks, but the kind that starts small, like a tremor, then gains power as it rolls through the room. "What?" someone said aloud. "No way." But now, with the hoodie off, there was no denying it. The signature jawline, the eyes, the voice, suddenly unmistakable. Someone near the cable cross machine fumbled for their phone. "Dude, that's Mark Wahlberg. That's Marky Mark." Another guy, mid-set on curls, dropped his dumbbells and just stared, frozen like he'd seen a ghost from both his childhood and his pre-workout dreams. Even the gym manager came out from behind the front desk, mouth slightly open, like he'd just realized he'd waived the liability form of a global icon. Chad blinked several times, taking a step back. Wait, you're the Mark Wahlberg?" Mark nodded, grabbing his water. "Last I checked." Chad ran a hand through his hair, then over his face, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Why didn't you say anything?" Mark tilted his head. "Would it have changed the workout?" Chad laughed. A small, humbled sound that came from somewhere honest. "I mean, probably. Yeah. I wouldn't have talked all that trash." Mark chuckled. That warm, disarming laugh that had diffused so many tense rooms in his life. "That's why I didn't." The gym cracked up. Genuine laughter this time. The kind that comes when tension finally gives way to shared humanity. One of the younger guys asked to shake his hand. Another asked for a photo. Mark obliged both humbly without showmanship. He wasn't there to soak up attention, but he wasn't rude either, just gracious, just real. Chad, meanwhile, stood frozen in the weird limbo between embarrassment and admiration. "I thought you were just some actor," he said. "You are," Mark replied. "But I don't just play guys who train hard. I am one." That line resonated. It landed with weight. Not because it was a punchline, but because it was true. Every person in that gym, even those who had no love for celebrity culture, understood now that the man who had just outperformed them didn't do it with star power. He did it with work. Years of it. Mornings most of them hadn't seen in years. Pain most of them thought they owned. Mark had walked into their space not as a tourist, not as a showman, but as one of them. And now that they knew who he was, it didn't make him feel larger. Strangely, it made him feel closer. One of the older members, a quiet man with knotted forearms and knee sleeves, stepped forward. "You're the real deal, Wahlberg," he said with a nod. "Most actors wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes." Mark shook his hand firmly. "Appreciate that," he said. "I don't talk about it much. I just do the work." That sentiment stuck. It echoed across the gym walls like a mantra. Chad, now finally able to laugh at himself, shook his head. "Man, I gave you so much crap." Mark smiled. "You gave me a great workout. Call it even." Outside, the sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Mark slung his bag over his shoulder and made his way toward the exit. His hoodie tied around his waist, his steps easy. He wasn't walking like a man who just won anything. He was walking like a man who had simply shown up as himself, and that had been enough. Behind him, the gym was buzzing, not just from the reveal, but from what it meant. Every person in that room had just witnessed something unforgettable. A man of status and fame who had no need to prove anything, yet proved everything anyway. And the best part? He did it without ever needing to say he was special, because his effort had already said it for him. As the gym slowly returned to life after Mark's quiet exit, there was a strange, lingering silence in Chad's chest. A silence that didn't feel like defeat, but like truth settling into its rightful place. He sat on the edge of the inclined bench, elbows on knees, eyes glazed over not with exhaustion, but realization. The man he'd mocked, dismissed, and challenged like a weekend warrior hadn't just outworked him. He'd done it without making Chad feel small. And somehow that was the part that hit the hardest. There was no gloating, no mic drop, no Instagram post flexing a scoreboard. Just dignity. Measured, quiet, impossible to deny. A few guys were still talking about it. One was Googling Mark's workout routine. Another was explaining how Wahlberg wakes up at 2:30 a.m. to train. "No way," someone said. "That's not real." But the disbelief was losing ground to the memory of what they'd just witnessed. It was real. Chad could still feel it in his lungs, in his legs, in the way his ego had cracked open somewhere around the third set of burpee tuck jumps. He looked at the wall in front of him, where a crooked sign read, "Earn everything." It used to feel like a motto. Now it felt like a challenge he had misunderstood. 15 minutes passed before the gym manager approached. "You good?" he asked quietly. Chad nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." The manager smirked. "About the fact you called Mark Wahlberg a poser?" Chad chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, that part too." But there was no bitterness in his tone. Just reflection, humility, growth, sprouting in the cracks left behind by shattered pride. "Guy didn't say a damn word the whole time," the manager added. "Let his work talk." Chad nodded slowly. "Yeah." He didn't have to say a thing. He already knew who he was. It was that sentence that looped in Chad's head as he walked to the back office, peeled off his sweat-soaked shirt, and stared into the mirror. Not in a vain way, not like before, but like a man who had just been handed a mirror from someone who didn't need to break him to help him see himself clearly. He'd spent so long yelling over people, sizing them up, reading bodies like resumes. But today, someone had walked in with none of the expected credentials and dismantled his assumptions with nothing but grace and grit. It wasn't just humbling, it was clarifying. Later that evening, the regulars lingered longer than usual. The vibe in the gym was different now, lighter but sharper, like the air had been filtered through something real. Some talked about it with reverence, some with curiosity. A few even changed their workouts on the spot. But none of them could stop revisiting the same theme: effort over ego, discipline over noise. And in the middle of it all was Chad, no longer the loudest voice in the room, but maybe, for the first time, the most thoughtful one. He called for a brief team huddle before close, something he rarely did. A few lifters, curious, gathered near the turf. "Look," he started, rubbing the back of his neck. "Today I learned something that's gonna stick with me." He paused. "I've been training people for a long time, seen all kinds. Guys with talent, guys with drive, guys who talk, and guys who work." He looked around the circle. "But what I saw today, what we saw, that was different. That was next level. Not just because it was Mark Wahlberg, but because he didn't act like Mark Wahlberg. He acted like one of us. And then he trained harder than all of us." The group was quiet, but not out of awkwardness, out of respect. Chad continued. "I gave him a hard time. I misread him. And honestly, I've probably done that with a lot of people over the years, thinking I had to test them before they earned space here." His voice softened. "But maybe the real strength is giving people the space before they have to prove themselves. Letting the work speak instead of our own insecurities." No one clapped. No one needed to. They just listened. And that was enough. The next morning, the iron pit had a different rhythm. Not softer, just more aware. People nodded more, helped re-rack weights for others. A couple of guys who used to train in silence started small conversations between sets. Chad, instead of barking orders, walked quietly through the floor, spotting someone here, giving a tip there. And in the corner, a new sign had been taped to the mirror with blue painter's tape. It read, "Be the quietest guy in the room, and the hardest worker in it. MW. Chad didn't put it there. One of the lifters did. No one wanted to take it down. And nobody needed to say who MW was. Everyone knew. The story had already spread through the neighborhood. Mark Wahlberg came through the iron pit and didn't say a word. Out-trained our trainer and then thanked him for the challenge. Class act. Monster work ethic." It was the kind of story that grows not through exaggeration but through respect. The kind people tell their kids when they teach them about humility and hustle. Weeks passed. Then a month. Chad found himself repeating parts of the lesson in his own training journal. Listen more. Assume less. Lead with sweat. He even started a community workout every Sunday. No egos, no hierarchy, just whoever showed up and gave it their all. The first one drew 8 people. The next week, 15. By week 3, they had 30. No one talked trash. No one tried to be the alpha. It wasn't necessary. The tone had been set. And somewhere in a sleek office miles across the city, Mark Wahlberg sat with his team, flipping through location photos for his next film. He paused at one, the iron pit. A quiet grin crept across his face. "That's the one," he said. "That gym's got heart."